The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Luke. Jesus said to his disciples, "The Son of Man is destined to suffer grievously, to be rejected by the elders and the chief priests and scribes, and to be put to death, and to be raised up on the third day." Then to all he said, "If anyone wants to be a follower of mine, let him renounce himself and take up his cross every day and follow me. For anyone who wants to save his life will lose it, but anyone who loses his life for my sake, that man will save it. What gain then is it for a man to have won the whole world and to have lost or ruined his very self?" The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
One of the realities that we face in our lives is our hearts are often divided. Our hearts are very divided, actually. And that's simply because it takes time and a certain kind of education and virtue and character development to begin to understand what is truly good for us, and not just to understand, but to choose what is truly good for us, to will what is good for us, so that we can grow and develop. Moses in the first reading is, the book of Deuteronomy is situated at the end of Moses' life. He will die at the end of the book of Deuteronomy before the people of God enter into the promised land. And after 40 years in the desert, Moses is given this exhortation. The nature, the literary genre of Deuteronomy is exhortatory writing. And so he's encouraging them how to live in relationship with God after reflecting on those 40 years in the desert. And so in this, what is called the third discourse in the book of Deuteronomy, he's telling them, before you is placed life and death. And it's something that he's bringing them to realize that this is part of everyday living. It's not just in big decisions that we have to see, okay, here is something that there's this tension between life and death here. But in our everyday small decisions, are we choosing life or are we choosing a path of death? Are we choosing to do the will of God, in other words, or are we choosing otherwise? And so Moses is bringing them to a conscious recognition of how do we live the will of the Lord, the covenant, in other words, in our everyday lives. Now, of course, Lent is a wonderful time for us, and the readings all through Lent will point us to the conversion of heart. Because in the midst of our divided hearts, Lent is saying to us, here is a ritualized time for us as a people to reset and to remember. That's why we say when we administer the ashes, remember, O creature, remember you are dust, and unto dust you shall return. Because our memories are short. And so it's very easy to forget what happened yesterday. It's very easy to forget things and go back to old ways of living. It's very easy to forget and fall sway to our passions and desires that don't lead us to what is a better version of ourselves, but actually to a vice-laden life. And so Moses is saying, see in the everyday choices that we have to make, life or death. Life or death. Now, if we see things like that, and in life, therefore, what he's also saying here is that it's a way of loving the Lord. And if we were to live like that, then what a difference that would make in our families, in our friendships, in our society, in our workplaces, in our world. Because we begin to realize that the gospel is not just meant to be lived in the big things, and that's one of the fallacies that we live with. We think, okay, I have to live the gospel, on these days, or when it's big decisions. But in every single moment presented before me is an option. What is the will of God here? Or am I going to follow my own way? Or the way of the world? Or the way of the evil one? Where do I stand? Part of the challenge, Jesus says in the gospel, if anyone wants to be a follower of mine, let them renounce themselves or deny themselves, take up their cross every day and follow me. And that's not easy. In fact, I think one of the challenges we have in being followers, disciples of Jesus, is we're stuck on the first one. That we're challenged in denying ourselves, renouncing ourselves, that we're so close in on ourselves, we're so absorbed in ourselves that it's very hard to allow the other two to follow. And therefore, what happens quite often is, before us is a number of options in life, and just when we think about the choices we make, before us, the reason we are drawn to something is because we see some kind of good in it. That was Aristotle, the opening lines of his Nicomachean Ethics. He spoke that everything is aims towards, is pointed towards some good. So, although it may not, in our minds we may say, this is not good for me, the reason I want to do this is there's some good that we think. Whether it's truly good or not is a different story. So the thief who is about to steal something sees, well, if I get this, I might be able to do this and that and the other. In it, he sees some good for himself. You understand that? That's a little bit of Aristotle 101. But anyway, and therefore, I mean, just think about our own lives, you know. We probably know, let's say we struggle with, I don't know, we shouldn't have sugar, and yet somebody brings a lovely tub of ice cream in the house, you know, and we say, oh gosh, you know, this is not just the cheaper one, this is a nice, I don't know, Belgian chocolate. And in it, we see some good for us, and it draws us. And the question we have to ask ourselves is, we have to then begin a kind of learning, well, is this really good? Or is this just apparently good? It looks good, but not really good for me. Now, that is supposed to happen in all the areas of our lives, in all our appetites. And the appetites are many. In our hungers, our thirsts, in our sexual and relationship, in our social lives, etc. Are these decisions I make really good for me, and will they lead to my flourishing, therefore, or will they take away from my flourishing? That's the kind of thing Moses is speaking about when he says, choose life, therefore, that you may live. Keep the commandments of the Lord. And of course, Jesus broadens this and says, well, you do it because of love of God and love of each other. That's why you do it. And so the Lenten period is a desert experience. It's an experience of stepping back, stepping away from our desires. That's why we fast. We fast to step away from them and to evaluate, is this good for me or is it not? And this involves our passions, our desires, our appetites, that we are not meant to be flung by them, but being a child of God and having partaken in the rational mind that we have, and therefore the truth that God is, means that we have to evaluate. What will lead to my flourishing? What will lead to my becoming a better version of myself? What will lead me to truly live freely, not enslaved to my passions or desires? Freely in a way in which I choose, no, I won't do that. I'll do this, because this is what is good for me, good for my family, good for others, good for my relationship with God. Choose life then, Moses says. Choose life then. And what happens? God will bless us. What happens when we get enslaved on the other side of it, when we choose what is not good for us, when we go down that path of indulging our passions and desires without critiquing and looking and seeing what is really good for us, is that we ultimately, as he's saying, we're killing ourselves. We ultimately are choosing a path of death. And he says to them, you'll be drawn into worshiping other gods. Yes, what we spend our time on and what we become obsessed over is what we worship. And we have to be careful, because in our world we erect so many false gods. And we have to look and see, what is this time of Lent inviting me to do? And then to look deep inside. Shortly, we will distribute ashes once more, as the Archbishop has given the allowance for the distribution of ashes today and tomorrow as well. And the distribution of ashes, in marking us, in cutting through, you know, it's a very powerful symbol. That we are scarred with this on our foreheads. And it cuts through whatever kind of cosmetic people may have on or whatever. In other words, it says to us, before God, it is your real self that counts. Cut away the pretense. Cut away all the falsities. Cut away anything that stands between you and God. Because in this time of Lent, we have to be honest with ourselves, honest with our divided hearts, honest with what's pulling us in many directions, and the ways in which we fall prey to those things, and bring all of that before God, who is tenderness and love, mercy and compassion. And therefore remember that we are sinners. We are sinners. We can say dusty old sinners with our ashes, but we're sinners. And we are in need of God's help. We're in need of His grace. We can't save ourselves. And that's the beauty of this time of Lent. It is a reset. Jesus therefore says to us, if if any of us wants to be a follower of his, then renounce yourself. And again, that means we have to learn to stand back, delay gratification. The opening prayer of Ash Wednesday yesterday speaks about taking up the weapons of delayed gratification, of self-denial, in order to fight in the spiritual battle that we face. Yeah. Because we live in an indulgent, addictive culture. Jesus then says, take up your cross. Don't look at anybody else's cross. Take up your cross. And that means, in its original sense in the text, it speaks about the sufferings we endure for the sake of Christ. That there's a price for following Christ. There's a price we face, and we know it. To be Christian is not easy. The price that it means to forgive, or to love, or to endure, and to not just bear with, to care for those that we just can't stand, to be reconciled with each other. The price that it costs us to follow Christ is part of the cross that we must carry. Take it up. It also involves the sufferings we face, but in its original sense, it is the suffering for the sake of Christ. And once we begin to deny ourselves, and we realize, well, there's much for us to endure. And it's not easy. Take up your cross and follow me. Because in the end, what the Lord wants is disciples. I love to use the image of a fan club. Quite often, what we settle for is to be a fan of Jesus. He doesn't want a fan. He wants a disciple. The difference is, the fan stands on the side and waves a rag and says, "Hey, Jesus," And we do lots of that. The fan is able to stand there and cheer him on. And Jesus says, get in the trenches with me and take up your cross and follow me. And the fan might say, who, me? Not me, no, I'm not going down there. It's easier to stand on the side and wave and say, yeah, Jesus, yes, you paid that price for us. And then he says, pick up your cross and follow me. And the path that he shows us is a path to death. But death is not the end. There is no new life without death. We are given the opportunity for a reset. Let us not waste the moment that God presents in our lives, because time is short. Life, Lord, as Psalm 90 verse 12 says, Lord, give us wisdom of heart that we may know the shortness of life. Amen.